off and pick it up without getting out of your car. You can go through a restaurant drive-through, may pretty much be fast food, although now most sit-down restaurants have a carry-out curbside service with reserved parking for your carry-out. You can do your banking drive-through. If you live in New Jersey, you can do your gas filling drive-through. It's convenient. And so the problem is, when you only have a form of religion, then you've got to come up with a convenient, easy religion. And that's all well and good on the surface. The problem is, again, storms individually will come, and collectively in society, storms will come. And it's at those times that the real foundation gets revealed. And it's in those moments that if you cut corners, if you cheapened the work, trouble's going to come. Last month, one Sunday towards the end of the month, I forget the exact Sunday, some of you, I'm sure, will remember. Late in the afternoon, it was getting close to time at our house to start getting ready for church. All of a sudden, skies began to get dark. This storm began to move in. And then we were upstairs in the house and looking out the window, and I'm seeing tall trees starting to bend. And so we all got together and went down to the basement. It was at that moment I was trusting. And even then, I can't tell you I consciously thought about it. But you know what? Subconsciously, there was a trust that says we are on a solid foundation. We are on something that is not going to move. And if the winds blow and they increase and the rain falls and it falls extremely heavy, we're okay. Because we're on a foundation that is set. David said in Psalms 91, I think it is, he said, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." And then he goes on to me, every believer ought to be familiar with that psalm. Because in the world that we're living in today, it is extremely relevant to what we face. Because he talks about that if you dwell in the secret place of God, if you have a relationship with God, not just religion, not just going through the motions of religion, but you really know God, you really have a relationship with Him, what he basically talks about is there are things that will go on around you, and yet they won't touch you. Again, I'm not in any way preaching to you today or in any way communicating that as a believer, as a child of God, as someone with a relationship with God, you're going to avoid all trouble. That's not true. But the point is this: God has the ability, if He chooses, that He can protect me from what's going on around me. When the children of Israel were about to come out of Egypt, and the plagues began to come, torment the Egyptians, the Bible tells us that for the children of Israel, they did not have to experience or deal with the same things that the Egyptians faced. That while all this problems, turmoil, plagues were taking place affecting the Egyptians, the children of Israel were at peace. Because God was able to protect them. That's what David, I think David was saying in Psalm 91. You can walk through trouble and problems and difficulties that are going on around you, but God is able to keep you. But you got to be on the right foundation. You got to be built on a sure foundation. Just got back last Monday. My dad and I were overseas for about a week. We spent most of that trip in Malaysia, and we were in Kuala Lumpur. There's a pretty recognizable landmark there. Perhaps some of you have seen it. They refer to it as the Twin Towers. Of course, we Americans would argue about that. We had the Twin Towers. But there are these two towers. They're called the Petronas Twin Towers. They go a little over 1,400 feet in the air. There's actually 88 occupied stories, offices, workplaces in there. Of course, one of the very unique things about it is that about 40-something floors up, the two buildings are connected by a skyway. If you've never seen it, go home and Google it. It's quite a sight. And one day when we were there, just kind of in the room resting, and I was flipping through the TV stations a little bit, and I don't know if it was National Geographic or Discover, I forget exactly which one, but they were doing a documentary on the building of the Petronas Towers. And at some point, it may have been from the very beginning, I got the impression it was a little bit later in the process, but as they began to significantly start to go up, every single day, not once a week, not once a month, not every couple of weeks, every single day, they would get the instruments out and they would measure if those towers were perfectly straight or not. Every single day, they would measure. And one day, they came in, began to do their measurements, and they found out that one of those towers was starting to be off. Of course, it was a very, very minute measurement compared to the size of it. I mean, it wasn't like feet. It was just, it was very fractional. But obviously, the point is, the higher you go, the more significant that fractional measurement becomes as you go higher. And so they got together, the engineers, the architects, and basically what they came up with is, we're going to have to shift some weight the other way to make sure it balances. You know what, I got to thinking about that, as I usually do and stuff like that. Begin to think about it, there's a spiritual application. It's a lot like us. If we're not careful, our lives begin to get off square. We start to tip some. And you know what? Initially, it's not that big of a deal. And sometimes it's such a small amount that it really doesn't seem to be that important. But the problem is, if you keep going, and you continue with that being out of balance, not being square, the longer you go, the more significant that becomes. And so every now and then, we've got to make sure that we balance our lives, not with popular opinion. You know how many things have changed today? People, it bothers me sometimes that people want to, they want to put a bad light on religion. There's a lot of things that religion, Christianity, stands for today that 20, 30 years ago, our culture, our society had very similar values as Christianity. But you know what's happened to our world? It's gotten off square. And so as it goes